we're going to talk about language. That is the slide title. So, now that we've talked about how to make your posts themselves accessible for folks who are blind or folks who have low vision or learning disabilities, we just want to make sure that the message that you're putting out there, that the language that you're using is oppressive and, is empowering and not oppressive. So what does that mean? Every community has language that makes people feel empowered and language that doesn't, that they don't approve of. In the case of the disability community, if you are, if you want to maybe specifically market something for people with disabilities, or if you're posting something about people with disabilities, you should try to use language that is being used by the community. And there's a link in our resource slide for a disability language style guide that goes in depth. But here in this slide, we have, is it a graphic, Chi? It looks like it's a graphic, right?
Yeah, so here are three different graphics to expand the narrative around ableism and language, the mainstream ableist language and alternatives. The first example is alternative to blind / blindly or turn a blind eye. Refers to blind, low vision, sight limited people with visual impairments, often used as a metaphor. So instead of using blindly or blind, you can say willfully ignorant, deliberately ignoring, turning their back on, overcome by prejudice, doubly anonymous. Doubly anonymous, had every reason to know, and feign ignorance. And then the next one is alternative to lame, refers to people with physical or mobility disabilities, often used as a metaphor as well. Instead of using "it's so lame," you can consider using boring, uninteresting, monotonous, lacks excitement, uncool, out of fashion, weak, or sad.
Thank you, Chi. And so just some, also to get you guys up to speed, ableism is a term that is used by the disability community. It is, similar to racism or sexism. So having prejudice and discriminating against people with disabilities. And when it happens to us, it is more subtle and more of a microaggression. So the language that is typically used about people with disabilities is something coming from a place of pity, usually, right? People with disabilities are described as suffering, challenged, impaired, right? So there's always language that sort of keeps people with disabilities in that very initial state of, whether they just became disabled or not. And people's lives move on, they adapt, they get tools and pick up skills, and so they do eventually move on, and they stop suffering, and they stop being challenged, right? They find solutions to problems. And so it's important that if you are sort of trying to create messaging specifically for the disability community, use language like people with disabilities instead of handicapped, right? You can also use disabled people. People with intellectual or cognitive disabilities instead of the word retarded, and so on and so forth, right? So the disability language style guide, which you can probably just search for on the internet, but it is in our resources slide, has a lot more detailed information. So our next slide is plain language. So more into language. This is not more necessarily about oppressive or empowering language. Now it's just about, will people be able to understand your message? So we encourage you guys to try to use plain language in your communications as much as possible, so that folks with disabilities, all sorts of disabilities, can understand your messaging. But also, we live in New York City here, or at least the three of us panelists, we live in New York City, and we have a large population of folks that are either immigrants or have limited English proficiency. So it helps reach those folks as well. So plain language is described as text that could be understood from the first read. And generally, you know, you want to use shorter sentences, so avoid long run-on sentences, and use more common phrases and terms. So some things to keep in mind: write for your reader and not yourself. And it's very easy for us to, you know, if we want to get a message out there, we might not think about that and just put the language that we are used to understanding. So think about, you know, who will be reading this, and you know, what language you think will be coming across to them. Will it be the very technical language with acronyms and technical jargon, or will it be more, you know, common everyday language? So stick to your topic, limit each paragraph to one idea. These are all just things that I think will make your content a lot more straightforward and easy to follow for most folks. Right? In the active voice. So using the word you a lot, right? You can apply for these services, right? You can buy our product and have this experience, right? Or get this benefit. So, you know, speaking directly to the audience member using the active voice goes a long way. So as I said, use everyday word, explain new terms, whether they're acronyms or just technical terms that are used maybe within your profession, but not outside. So define those the first time, right? So that folks know and are not guessing, trying to figure out from the context what your acronym means or what this new term that you've dropped means, right? Next slide.